All right. Okay. I think we're live. I hope the sound is all right, guys. Please tell me if it is not. Hey everyone, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters, and today I have a very special show for you. Today I am actually going to take a second fiddle to my own show, so to say, and give the word to a person that knows much more than me on the topic we're going to be discussing. But as always, I want to introduce everyone to the fact that this channel is running in a big thanks to the moderating team that are able to keep our comment section clean, and we can have less of the Russian trolls. So we are running this channel very nicely and tightly. So please join me and give a hand to the moderating team. Thank you so much, guys, for what you do. But the guest for today that I'm going to have is Dylan Burns. If you don't know Dylan, Dylan is a journalist and he has been to Ukraine already multiple times. And when I'm saying he's been to Ukraine, he's not like a journalist that spent his time in a city. He's the guy that goes on the front line and basically pesters the military and the locals and talks about, well, how things actually are. And he just released a movie. So I watched the movie. It was powerful. It was really impactful. The unfortunate part is it didn't get really the exposure that we wanted to get. So today, Dylan is going to tell us exactly what the movie was about, but more importantly, what is the basis for the movie? What is this Russian safari that we're talking about? And yeah, I hope we learn something and you're going to get the ability to ask some of the questions to Dylan. So Dylan, take it away. Can you introduce yourself in a couple of words for people that might see you for the first time, and tell us what is this all about? What's the safari?
Sure. My name's Dylan Burns. I'm a political streamer, but I mostly have been more recently known for the documentary filmmaking. I engage in Ukraine, filming with soldiers and embedding with military units on the ground, from Sibernitsky Forest to across from the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, all across the front line. I think basically every frontline region. I haven't been to Odessa yet. Okay, I need an invitation to the theater there. But I had never seen peacetime Kherson. I've never seen Kherson, but in the state that it is in now. And my first interaction with Kherson was after the Novokakhovka Dam was blown up and the city was flooded. So my first sight of the city streets was it filled up to the top with with a lot of the lower of the city and homes just being flooded with water as people were trying to get boats out on the river to go save lives. And during that embed, I was shelled with a bunch of other aid workers who were trying to get people out of their homes. The elderly and the disabled were unable to get out of their homes and they were drowning. And Russian mortar teams ended up shelling our rescue operation, and it hit my good friend John Jones in the stomach. He was dragged to safety, and it was not a great afternoon. And after that, the next day, the Russians posted a video. And that video was of John Jones getting hit in the stomach, and we were called basically Ukrainian super soldiers trying to establish a bridgehead over the other side of the river. That was my experience with the human safari before the human safari happened. And I consider myself very lucky in that instance because I was supposed to be on the boat, but it was just too crowded. And John Jones, even though he's an elderly British expat, he's actually coming back to Ukraine this year. Very brave man. But that was my first interaction with it before it had the name Human Safari. But as time happened and I covered other areas of the front outside of Chasiv Yar, Pokrovsk, and all these different places, Constantinople, which is right now being bombed to the ground, I started to hear these reports coming out of a human safari. That was the word that I heard the media say. And I at first thought, okay, this is branding. And that's not to say that I don't know that the Russians target them, but I didn't think the locals used the word human safari, that they knew this word, that this was, possibly a repackaging of something I'd already seen. But when I went back, before, the main issue was shelling when I was in the city after the Kherson flooding tragedy happened. 48 hours after the flood water rushed the city was shelled. But when I was there, while there was still shelling of civilians and civilians were still getting hurt by shelling, it was drones. Drones were hunting people, and the locals were referring to it as a safari as well. And what I saw in the week that I was in Kherson filming this documentary towards the end of 2024 was testimony from tons of civilians, from city employees to civilians to just about every section of the society you could see, retelling horror stories of getting chased down the street by drones armed with RPGs, with nails, screws, and different bits of metal tied to it. So when they explode, they can tear through their legs, arms, chest, and body. And I thought it would be maybe difficult getting evidence for it, just like I thought when I got shelled by the Russians that it'd be difficult getting evidence for it. But it was one of the easiest investigations of my life because the Russians provide all of the evidence online. The only difference is every Telegram post they put out there, they just claim that they're soldiers, even though they're in civilian clothing. They'll just claim it's a costume. And so the Russians have been engaging in a basically hunt for any side of life on the city streets.
Does it matter for them if it's civilian, non-civilian? Do they just look for someone that looks military? Because even in the documentary, you mentioned there a lot of civilians are stating that they're wearing helmets, they're wearing some armor. Could it be that Russians are just hunting for someone that just looks military?
It's hard to say because it feels, if you're asking what I can speculate, what I know for sure, and what my inclination is personally.
Well,
First, I'll say what I know. First, I'll say what I know for sure, and then I'll say what my inclinations are telling me, because I want to make sure that I separate like fact from what I'm trying to figure out. The Russians will identify civilian clothing on people and will still bomb them. And what they'll enter online is that they were just soldiers dressed as civilians. But I've talked to many of these civilians, and wouldn't you know it, a lot of them are civilians. While it isn't impossible to see soldiers riding around on bikes or driving civilian cars to get from different positions, and a lot of these instances, the Russians are not doing what you would call, and what is popularly talked about, I think, in the war in Gaza, but is also important here, which is called, I'm forgetting, I can't believe I'm forgetting the word for it, but it's, there's a limitation you have to make sure that you know that the targets you're hitting are military, because you need to account for collateral damage. And this is made in a lot of different ways. Like, okay, if I do this strike, maybe I'll kill 5 terrorists and 1 civilian. That's a sacrifice necessary because the 5 terrorists down the line could kill. And this is the dreadful moral calculus that military theorists around the world have to do. I don't believe that calculus is happening whatsoever. I believe that when they see signs of life, especially if you're in the east of the city, they tend to just strike them, or in some instances, and this is moving over to my inclinations, they'll miss a military target, get frustrated, and hit whatever they can. And I actually think that might be what happened in my original instance in Kherson, where maybe they missed a military target and then eventually ended up hitting us. And I think that there's other instances where they get frustrated and they end up going for civilian targets. And from all the messages they're putting out on Telegram, it seems very clear to me that their main message to civilians is leave. That they need them to leave, they want them to go. And the military benefit of making the city a ghost town would be any movement is the enemy. And so if you scare the civilians away, then all the movement you see on the city streets has to just be soldiers, right? And this also could lead to personal justifications for striking people that look like a babushka, or look like somebody who, oh, that looks like just a random man in civilian clothing. But in some of these instances, even though I can stretch the boundaries of justification and self, some of these instances I can't find that justification. It has to be a justification of, I really cannot say outside my personal calculus being terror. When I see them strike garbage trucks, when I see them strike fire trucks on multiple instances, rushing to get to homes that are on fire, when I see them strike ambulance crews again and again and again, and I have an extensive interview in this documentary with an ambulance crew talking about being attacked, about his colleagues being attacked, about his colleague having his scalp ripped off by Russian bombs as they're bombing their ambulance crews trying to get to civilians. And so what you get is this horrible situation where a house is on fire and the fire truck crew has to make the calculation. The firemen, do we go to the home and try to save it, or will that lead to the loss of this fire truck, loss of city resources, which is already under immense pressure due to the daily bombing and drone attacks? And as 2025 has started, these drone attacks have only increased. I've looked at the data. There are days in 2025 that have exceeded some of the worst days in 2024 for drone attacks in the city. So this is not something that's stopping anytime soon. So we have to get to the bottom of it, and there has to be more international attention.
Yeah. Well, from my personal perspective, watching your movie, like I obviously cannot be so lenient towards Russians as you were here trying to distinguish what is true, what is not, because like I've seen the videos and like striking the fire trucks videos, like it doesn't matter like how you look at it, it was a fire truck. Like you cannot really make it to be like some kind of military installation or anything, striking people that were just carrying buckets of either water or something, milk maybe. And more importantly, when we're talking about where Russians want the civilians out, well, as far as I know, there isn't any single kind of war rule book that says, well, if you don't like civilians to be there, well, just kill like 100 or 200 of them, and then the rest
Nope.
will leave. I don't really think that this is any kind of
You
civilized
can't you
rules of
can't just
war.
say civilians be gone and then everything's fair game. That's not how it works.
Correct. But the funniest thing is like, and I'm going to hand it after this to you with the question, is that the Ukrainians in your video, they're also talking and asking basically for civilians to also leave. They're saying that it would be
Yes.
much easier for the Ukrainian military to work actually and not worry as much if civilians would leave the war zone. But what I wanted to ask you is, when you were standing there, like filming all of these videos, experiencing that situation, when you, at what moment, like what you realized the depth of the problem that was happening, and maybe even
Oof.
when you kind of realize that it's the problem that requires additional attention, that it's not being fully acknowledged basically by anyone. Everyone is interested in negotiations rather than this.
I also wanted to say on the buckets thing before I answer that question is these civilians have to go outside in order to get water, in order to get food. And so while these Russian Telegram channels will demand that civilians stay indoors, they can't. They have to go outside in order to get water and food. And there are these water distribution points, as I display in the documentary while I'm interviewing the store that was attacked, and people were saved by watermelons. My God, the symbolism in that. Watermelons physically blocking Russian shrapnel headed towards civilians. What's more of a Hersonite quality than watermelons saving their lives? But like these civilians have to go outside. I found the same issue in Chasiv in a lot of frontline cities, and so just demanding that they don't go out to save their lives, like you're starve them to death. They have to go outside to get supplies. As for the moment, honestly, it was. I think back to just sitting in the hospital, looking at John Jones in the bed. This elderly man with a white beard who was only in the boat when it was bombed because he used to do policing in the Caribbean as a boat driver in his youth, but he's now an older man trying to do what he can to help. And as I'm talking to him and trying to figure out what the next steps, what hospital is going to get transferred to, I get a text from my buddy. I open it out. It's my friend from Kiev. He's like, "Yo, is this you guys?" And it's the Russians putting like it's the God of War rock music over this video of them bombing civilians, trying to get people out of the river drowning in their homes. A bright red boat. It's not like it was trying to hide. It was a bright red rescue boat. It didn't have. There was no guns near it. There were no weapons near it. Even in the video, you can't identify weapons. They just said that there was a boat trying to create a bridgehead. Complete lie. And the fact that they could post it so publicly, and even when it got some of the most attention that I've gotten at that period in my career of documenting this war, it got like, I know hundreds of thousands of people saw that, and people went to the Telegram post, replied to it. These are civilians. These are rescue workers. They didn't take it down. They didn't remove it. They didn't comment. Didn't say anything. They didn't care. And at that moment, there was something in my soul saying, like, there's something wrong here. There's something. It's like this was a particularly evil instance. Now, whether it's something that's reserved to Kherson or not is something that I speculate and talk about at the end of the documentary. Whether this is just something that's happening in Kherson or if this is something that might be happening all across the Ukrainian front line, and it's just that the Russians in Kherson are posting the most footage of it. It's hard to say, but I just have never engaged with something so blatant. It would be the equivalent. I get pulled over by a police officer. He beats me on the side of the road and posts a video on it the next day saying like cops rule or something. It's this guy was like an MS-13 dude. It's so blatant. It's you're left baffled whether you're really awake or not. It was very surreal.
No, my microphone doesn't work. It's fine. Uh, yeah, it is surreal, and like for me personally, when I saw the videos, I'm not sure if people have seen the videos. People love to comment on the sound of my microphone, but I think it's less relevant. So what I look at people commenting is that no one is really surprised by it. So what you will tell to a person that says that, well, this is just how the war is, why do you think that it's relevant to talk about it then?
It's relevant because we're showing this territory that's being talked about here, Son. Not only is it relevant because if you don't react with visceral disgust, if the world doesn't react, if the world doesn't pay attention, then we allow that to be the state of affairs in warfare, right? When we do not act, and we do not react, or we do not pay attention, then I think we kind of accept the world as it is and say, oh, it is what it is, and then we kind of soothe ourselves into complacency about these things, saying we can't do anything about it, which you could, but it just makes you feel better if you just say, "Oh, it's how the world is. You can't do anything to change it." People have changed the world all over throughout human history. I don't know why this would be any different. Um, but also, I would say that this instance of brutality is particularly stunning, considering the Russians claimed the city. The Russians annexed it in their constitution, and they say for any deal that this city has to be given to them, meaning that the city streets where civilians are being hunted, the Russians say that's also theirs, and they want control of the entire city. So what does that mean if that actually comes to pass? Not only for Ukraine's defense, as the Dnieper would be crossed, this extremely powerful natural defense line, without a fight after they fought for Kherson back, but what would this mean for the civilians that were there? I mean, I interviewed this woman at the end as she's sitting in this hospital bed, her whole leg up and down, just like full of of wounds because she had them riddled by Russian shrapnel when she was trying to get her medicine for her husband going over to the pharmacy. And they're just, no, we're going to stay. We're going to stay. We're going to continue to stay. So these are people who have been here for a very long time, have no dreams of leaving, who are standing up despite these attacks. What's going to happen to them? For them to face this with such resolute resolve and then be traded away without a fight, I mean, that's something that could be particularly scary for the city's residents, which is why I focused a decent amount about what the occupation was like, what that meant for example, religious freedom, which we did focus a section on that, but also the soldiers that are making, entrenchments trying to defend the city in case the Russians try again.
Do you think they will try again?
I think they will. At this point, I think it's almost inevitable. Whether or not they take the route of going into Kherson or they take the route of invading into Sumy and Kharkiv and other regions and saying, look, if you want back this area near Lipsy or Vovchansk, or you want back Oskovy, if they, marched and took Oskovy, for example, then you're going to have to trade for Kherson. Or you're going to have all these regions partially divided and as new potential launch points for invasions in the Sumy and Kharkiv, a Sumy People's Republic, a Kharkiv People's Republic that continues to perpetuate the war. So we could be talking about a shift from the conversation, which a year ago it was trading Kursk, or like 10 months ago, it was like trading Kursk for Ukrainian land back. And now we're talking about trading Sumy and Kharkiv for Kherson, Zaporizhia, and other lands that they've announced the annexations of, because the Russians have yet to back off of these demands. And while I think some people just always assumed they would, I don't think that was based in anything other than a hope and like a prayer that they would. And right now, when they think that the United States is breaking off its aid packages, breaking off intelligence support, that there's not much dedication in the Trumpian base for this, why would they think, oh, we stood up 3 years against, the United States, Europe, and all that. Now we can just have to stand up against Europe and Ukraine. It's going to be much easier. And so there's a circumstance where I'm really worried about the future for the people of Kherson, because I want the human safari to stop, but I also don't want it to become just more personal. Instead of it's the human safari, it's people knocking on people's doors.
Yeah. Well, I believe, if I'm not wrong, I saw just today the messages that Russia is refusing any kind of a ceasefire on the current terms. And they're again proposing that Ukraine says no to NATO, removes like over like limits their military to like 80,000 and hands over like the 4 regions, and that's when the ceasefire can start. So it's Russia, surprising to absolutely no one. Well, maybe at least like one or two people that I might know. Russia has pretty much exited the room. Yeah, but like this threat of the military, it is always there, and Russians. If this safari and like, I mean, I think you're making a strong case for it in your video, in your movie. If this will continue happening for a year, for 2, do you think people care more or less about this? Because so far, it doesn't seem that
It's
there's
it's
a
been
lot of
going
people.
on for a year. It's been going on for quite a while now, and I mean the reports of human safari have been reported by the Washington Post, have been reported by the Kiev Post. I saw CNN like I think it was like 7 days or 8 days ago. They released a 5-minute segment. Now I would of course say that I don't think you can really get across the veracity of the case and the sheer size and sheer volume of these attacks in just 5 minutes, which is part of the reason why I tried to take so much time with it. I know an hour and 10 minutes is a lot, but there's a lot of evidence, and I want to make the strongest historical case possible. Um, so I hope that what happens is not, oh, we do the duty of covering it, which is my fear, is that they're going to do a 5-minute segment, they're going to do an article there, we covered it, the checklist is done, and we can walk away. When the journalist's job is to inform the public. The journalist's job is to inform the public. And as one person, I only have so much reach these bigger media institutions do. And as we're talking about Russian demands to annex Kherson, the human safari should be the first thing mentioned in any conversation about these territories. Are we comfortable handing over these homes and these people over to the people that hunted them on the street like this? Are we comfortable signing our names to that? And even if we're comfortable with it, will the Ukrainians? Certainly not. And so that, I mean, does that doom any ceasefire negotiation from the start? These types of conversations, these types of breakdowns need to be had now, because I don't see that type of complex thinking across the front line. I see these broad, just kind of, well, almost bullet point catchphrases: ceasefire, peace in our time. Not, well, what's going to happen to the children that were kidnapped? Are they going to be returned for sure? What's going to happen to the future of Kherson? None of this has been settled, and it seems like they're avoiding the topic because they're scared of addressing it. I saw Steve Witkoff tried to cover it on Tucker Carlson's show, and that was a disaster.
I think you're hitting a nail on the head, like on kind of like my. I don't want to say critique, because like I fully agree with you that it's absolutely important for us to tell, and that's why I'm really glad that you guys are here watching this right now and interacting. My question is like, that has always been the question of my channel, and this is the main point of our channel. Is like, what is the reality of everything? Because right now I see that a lot of people in US are more preoccupied what Zelensky is wearing versus he's not wearing. That recent polls suggest that both Republicans and Democrats have started seeing less favorable view of Ukraine and the European Union, and actually Canada as well. That the rhetoric that is coming out from Trump about annexing Greenland, while at this point is very not super popular, but the charts are showing that there is a significant change, and potentially in a year of that, there is going to be continuing deaths. Inside of Europe, we have our own issues as well. We are barely struggling to figure out how we want to go further. We're still not even considering if this is an existential conflict. So what I'm getting at is that no one is even like, I hope you agree that this is an absolute crime, like a war crime and so on. But the term war crime has been diluted to basically non-existence because there is no world police, so to say.
Well, I
So
mean,
if
like international laws dictating war are basically just a bunch of norms dressed in a trench coat.
yeah, correct. So like international law, there is no like a policeman. It's always like about the agreement. So my question is, do you see any kind of a what's the word? I don't know, satisfaction for the victim, that because right now it's not on the table on any kind of big platform. Do you think it should be? Do you think it should be officialized? Who should be doing this? And what can maybe people that are watching this do to help promote it?
Now, I just want to say a little bit about American politics in Ukraine right now. What's fascinating is that the American public has quickly lost trust in the strategy of the Trump administration on solving this war. This is a poll from like 2 or 3 weeks ago, so meaning the numbers are probably not even worse now. So that only 27% of Americans thought that the negotiations that are happening right now are actually going to lead to long-term peace. So the majority of Americans actually can kind of, when they see a ceasefire announced and then 24 hours later they see something blow up, they think, well, doesn't a ceasefire have to cease fire? It doesn't need to be that complicated. Some, people can see things with their eyes, and as long as somebody has a grasp on object permanence above the age of 3, then they should be able to see that the ceasefire have not worked. And so I believe the poll was with CNN, by the way, if you're trying to look it up. Now, I also would like to say that when Zelensky had that Oval Office meeting, I would say that the biggest disaster for American politics is the continued partisanization of the conflict, where there are Republicans who are scared to speak out in favor of Ukraine because of how they could be seen as undermining Trump. And we've seen amongst the bases after the Oval Office meeting, Republicans' approval of Zelensky collapsed. And a lot of people, while that doesn't necessarily extend to Ukraine, and a lot of people's minds it does, because they don't really know other Ukrainians. You get, oh, what do you think of Timoshenko? Nobody of these people know this, like Taras Savchenko. They don't know any of that. So their popularity plummeted. Democrats actually went up like 10 or 12 points because they're like, Trump treated you like shit. You must be a good person, which that's how Democrats tend to think. They're partisan as well. So what I don't like is the partisanization of American politics on this issue. The majority of Americans still support aid to Ukraine, maintaining it or increasing it, roughly about 60 or a little bit above percent, according to Gallup from recent data that I saw. So Americans are still pro-Ukraine. They don't think Trump's strategy is working. And so I think that from my perception or my position on the issue of Ukraine, the American public is against the Trump campaigns or the Trump government's attempts to end the war because they just don't think it's working. The other question was, what was the other question? I'm sorry. Sorry to get into data breakdown. I promised
The
before
other
stream we
question
wouldn't
was
do
with
this.
regards to how should the satisfaction for the victim of this war crime and like what can we do? But I brought up this charts that I had in mind, like just so kind of we have the context what I was talking about. That we see that both the Republicans very steeply, but also within Democrats, we see that EU is unfriendly, Canada is unfriendly, and for Ukraine it's even higher. Like both in Democrats and yeah, I believe this is for Ukraine. Oh no, sorry, this is for Russia. So this is.
Well,
this is
it does
how
show
Russia
that there
being
is
seen.
that Russia's unfriendly or an enemy has gone down. That is, I haven't seen this data. That is fascinating.
Yeah.
But I would still note that if you look back that before the invasion, it is still above those numbers. And even with these decreases in these numbers, the majority of Americans still support aid to Ukraine. So it is having an effect. And I will not say that the way we've started to talk about Russia, and I think in a pretty naive way, isn't having an effect. But even with this overwhelming force, the physical evidence is still overwhelming that the majority of the American public has still not been convinced. But yes, the president all of a sudden sounding like Russia today, talking about Ukrainians being encircled in Kursk is going to have an effect for sure. As for compensation for the victim, I truly want it. And I think that the only way that Europe is going to get it is by grabbing it themselves from Russian assets and compensating the victims from what's available in their markets. But that would take making decisions about the Russians that could be long term about like the future of the Europe relationship that I don't think that all of Europe unanimously agrees on. I know Viktor Orban doesn't. I know Fico certainly doesn't, and I know others don't as well. But I don't think the Russians are going to turn over. Like, hey, Askionov, the governor of Crimea, he has a private military company. That's the governor of occupied Crimea. His private military company was the one that released the footage of us getting bombed. Do I think he's going to be arrested? Do I think anybody in the private military company is going to be arrested? Do I think the Russians will agree to any agreement where war criminals have to be brought to account? No, no, and no. We saw that Putin goes out of his way to take the units that were in Bucha and feature them to his left and to his right and feature them around him, give them awards, have their flags drawn out. So I don't believe that the Russians are going to willingly do it. It would only be done by going after the assets and compensating them financially, or putting the Russians in a position where they have no choice, which the current administration doesn't seem to be pursuing that policy yet.
Yeah. It seems like the only question that I got from you from the chat, because I was hoping the chat will ask some questions, and I'm sorry that my mic is low. There is no way I can fix it. Let's stop with these stupid questions. Let's do the other. And so the smartest question that the chat was able to squeeze out is, how much money did Soros pay you to produce this? And that's about
He pays me mostly in hard cider.
yes. So then, what can we do? Like, can we do something like just regular old Joes? Like, is there anything that we can influence? Well, obviously the elections. Like, let's drop the obvious one, but that one right now, both in Europe and US, is kind of, we're now in this limbo for the next 2
Well, I
years or
mean,
so.
I would say that it makes people uncomfortable, the reaction that certain politicians are getting at town hall meetings. When people decide to make town halls and they're allowing this to transpire and they're not making noise about it, maybe you should make noise at the town hall meeting. And I will tell you that it is a particularly, and maybe this is just me, but it's a pretty liberating experience to be able to go to the people who hold so much power, who represent you, and they have to sit there and listen to what you have to say. And you can use freedom of expression in this country, okay? If you are one of their constituents, they kind of have to listen to you. Hell, Victoria Spartz, who is the Republican congresswoman, actually, who came from Ukraine, who, while her hometown was being bombed, was like trying to undercut aid to Ukraine. She had a town hall meeting recently, and she tried to restrict it to stop any Soros-funded protesters coming out. She said, only my constituents can attend. You have to prove you're a constituent to be in the room, and it was still a disaster for her. And that's because the people who are paying attention to the news right now and are motivated to go out are the ones that feel injustices, not only about the health of the American Republic, but also about how America is being represented on the world stage. There's no reason that we should be making the type of trouble we are with our closest neighbor to the north. I have a lot of family, on the East Coast, East Coaster, born and raised, okay? I love my blue crabs here in Maryland. I'm the son of the Chesapeake. People in Massachusetts, people in these states that used to rely on Canadian and Ottawa tourism, they're seeing massive decreases in tourism because Canadians just don't want to come over here anymore and put money towards a country that's talking about their sovereignty as if it's worthless. And I think that there needs to be a wider conversation about the American mentality if we could so quickly accept the idea that a nation that put its sons in the ground in Afghanistan for us after we were attacked, not them, we'd so quickly turn to, oh, you're worthless. Maybe you should just be annexed. Your national sovereignty doesn't matter all that much. Let's place all this tariffs, which hurt us both. I'm getting a little bit into my personal opinion here, but
That's fine. Like, this channel is all about personal opinion, because I don't believe in non-biased, non-personal opinions, because those just doesn't exist. Like, even like if you read the scientific papers, it's the scientists telling us their personal opinions, except that they're trying to outline the biases that they have, so you are aware of them. But it's still just personal opinion. So everyone saying is like, "Oh, I'm just trying to be non-person." I think it's a load of nonsense. But that's my personal opinion again. Anyway, we actually got a pretty good question here, and I'm gonna follow it up. So I'm gonna twist the question, Void Flower. But the question is, how important is the U.S. support for Ukraine? And I'm gonna add, is, do the civilians on the frontline cities of Kherson, do they feel that there is support from US, and like, do they realize it in any kind of way?
So about 40 to 50%, we don't have the exact percentage point, obviously, because a lot of this is done in secret, but roughly speaking, 40% of the aid to Ukraine is from the United States. So any cessation of that aid, or the lack of keeping up current rates, i.e., we're no longer passing new supplemental deals, is going to have a detrimental impact all across the front line. And the areas where I think that's going to be most astute is going to be things like air defense, where we just do not have European production to make air defense systems to replace American productive capacity. And so as Ukraine continues to try to fire out these Russian drones from the sky, and the long-range ceasefire continues to, we'll just say, flounder, With time, the pressure on their air defense systems is going to build. It's going to be easier for the Russians to target their industrial capacity. It'll be easier for the Russians to target, their infrastructure or possibly even the energy grids again, as again that ceasefire has fallen through multiple times. It might make sense for them to, for example, remove that energy ceasefire when winter comes around, because right now, in spring, this is actually the period where energy outages would be the least destructive for everyday Ukrainians. And so, I'm very concerned about what the lack of that aid is of an impact is going to have. But I also don't know for sure how Trump can really maneuver out of, okay, the Russians just said no peace deal, give us all this land, Ukraine must demilitarize, or floating elections monitored by the UN. How do you maneuver out of that with no more aid to Ukraine, no more support, and not look like you just basically surrendered? And that's the answer I've not been able to find. And so I don't know for sure that aid's going to be completely cut off, especially if these special election results continue to turn belly up results for the Republican Party. Which we talk about the midterms, but the special election results are basically the canary in the coal mine for your political success. And so I'm not right now. The prospects are grim, but but the human grasp on hope is indomitable.
Isn't Musk like right now trying to buy some elections?
There is a court election in Wisconsin that Musk is dumping tons of money into, where I think right now he's handing out like $1 million checks to voters. And one instance, they say it's random, but I find a hard time believing it's random. I'm not saying it's impossible that it's random, but at last events, we found out that it wasn't actually that random, and they really shouldn't have been calling it like a giveaway. And this time it ended up randomly being given to like the head of the college Republicans in the state. And like of all the people, it just so happens to fall in these like Republican Party positions. I just don't really buy it. And plus I don't like it. I don't like the idea of going out and giving up these big checks for what he could say, oh, it's to get people registered. But no, people see it as, doing it to vote. Has anybody taken those checks and voted the other way? Do you have any evidence of that? I don't believe so. There's been some like Democrat financier response, but nothing at the scale of Musk. A lot of people are looking at this election and the elections that are coming soon after in Florida as kind of a wind chime to see the political winds. Right now, the prospects for the Republicans are pretty bad. The numbers for Trump in the district in Florida was plus 30 when he won it last time. Right now, the pollings have it at plus 9, which means a 21-point decrease in a pretty red district. And some people are saying of the possibility of being competitive. I think Democrats will still lose. I think the thing is to pay attention to how much they lose by, because if they lose by something like 5 points, that's scary for Republicans.
That's great. I think we're getting into the questions with regards to US. I would like to keep this video a little bit short. I'm going to cut it up to this segment right here. So, Dylan, before we finish it up today here, like the last word for you. Obviously, the link to the video will be in the comment section, and moderators will share it to the chat right now. But any last things that you can say about this safari, like to audience, whoever is going to listen to this?
The people in Kherson are very hardy people. They're people who care about their town and their neighbors. And when I talk to them about the reasons they don't leave, it's multivariate. Some people have their children buried there, and the idea of ever leaving their sign is just too traumatic to them, even compared to the hell they face when they try to go out in order to get water and food for their family. Others don't leave because others are not leaving that they care about. And while they care for their own safety and the safety of their family, some already having sent their families away, they can't abandon their neighbors. And when people leave, sometimes the ones that stay confined, it almost sets them into like a state. I've seen this happen all across the front where these conversations happen. Yeah, I'm deciding to leave. And I'm like, oh God, you too? When they're feeling their community start to slowly be pulled apart. And there's also the fear by some people that if Kherson is reoccupied and it's taken, if they're not in their home, the Russians will sell it. Because there's a lot of people in Mariupol who aren't living there anymore, who can see their videos on TikTok getting sold by these real estate investors in Russia who are coming over, buying up these properties and just selling them to basically Russian settlers. And so the reasons these people don't leave a multivariate. And so I understand why there were soldiers who were saying that they would wish they would leave considering the terror. But at the end of the day, a person has a right to their home, a person has a right to their community, and whatever the decision not to leave, they should not be terrorized in this way. And the idea of a city street being turned into a hunting or training ground for Russian drone pilots, as people continue to speculate, I can't say exactly why the Russians are doing this, but what I can say is that they are. And while the justifications we can find out later, personally, the most important thing is to make sure no more grandmas get hunted down while trying to get their medicine.
True. Thank you so much, Dylan, for joining up. Thank you so much, everyone that participated. Thank you so much for watching this video to the end. This is gonna be us saying thank you so much for watching. I love you, probably Dylan as well, and I'll see you next time.